Why was no one looking at her when she stepped off that transport truck? The air at Black Ridge tasted like rust. Not metal, rust. That blend of old iron weights, dried sweat, and concrete dust that settles in your lungs and never really leaves. At 600, the fog hadn't lifted yet. The gravel had already been pounded flat by boots from 3 different branches. Army, Marines, Navy. This was Endurance Day, and Black Ridge's 10-mile circuit didn't care about your title, your branch, or how many deployments you'd survived. Lieutenant Commander Mara Lauren stepped off that transport without a word. No salute, no greeting, just a small nod at the lead instructor before adjusting her sleeve over a thin scar on her forearm. Her shirt was regulation Navy PT, plain gray, no insignia, no rank patches, no trident. Only the minimal ID badge clipped to her waistband, rotation clearance, training evaluation. A staff sergeant manning the clipboard barely looked up as he checked her name. Another policy rotation, he muttered. Christ, they're sending them early this cycle. Behind him, 2 senior candidates stretched near the gravel track, watching her step away from the transport. New girl, one of them said, tightening his laces. She's going to burn out before checkpoint 2. Look at her gait, the other added, smirking. She's got the policy bounce. Bet she's here to write a memo. Mara didn't respond. She heard it, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she knelt near the start line, rolling her foot gently to stretch her ankle, watching the fog roll over the hilltops. Her eyes weren't scanning for other runners. They were reading the terrain, incline variance, wet patches from last night's dew, wind coming from the northeast. Her stretches weren't for show. 1 shoulder roll, 1 hamstring check, no excess motion, no chatter, just calibration. The lead instructor's voice snapped the group into attention. 10-mile perimeter circuit, single lane. No interference, no packing assistance. Aid stations at mile 4 and mile 8. If you drop out, you radio me. If you cheat, I'll know. Run clean. The group grunted acknowledgement. No one saluted, not here. Salutes didn't matter when the stopwatch ran. One of the trainees, the same one who mocked her gait, leaned toward the other and muttered low, "Unless you're friends with staff. Then of course rules bend." The implication hung heavy in the mist. As if she'd somehow secured her place here through anything other than merit. Mara didn't turn. She simply reached down and adjusted the tension on her right shoelace. Double-looped, cross-locked. A technique rarely seen outside of high-mobility SEAL units operating on inclined terrain. But no one recognized it, not yet. Her fingers brushed dirt off her knee. She inhaled through her nose once, then stood. The instructor raised a hand, checked the watch on his wrist, and shouted, "Time in 5, 4. The fog shifted. 3, 2, 1, go. The horn echoed like a slap. The group surged forward. Dozens of feet pounding gravel, grunts, breath, dust, sweat. Mara didn't sprint, didn't push. She moved with the middle pack, body low, posture neutral, breathing smooth. No one watched her go, which was exactly how she preferred it. The first mile was always noise. Cadence calling, forced breath patterns, half-choked adrenaline. Some ran to prove they belonged. Others ran to outpace suspicion. But Mara Lauren ran differently. She didn't dart to the front, didn't lag at the rear. Her pace was methodical. 6 strides inhale, 6 strides exhale. Slight lean forward to counteract the incline. She drifted through the fog like she'd memorized the terrain in another life. Each step was placed, not taken. No wasted motion. No flex bravado. By mile 2, sweat had begun to collect along the backs of necks. The mist had cleared, revealing the slope that broke most candidates before checkpoint 1, a half-mile ascent known as Broken Spine Ridge. It wasn't the height that killed you. It was the loose shale underfoot, the slight bend in grade, and the knowledge that it wasn't even halfway to the halfway mark. Mara climbed it silently, not with speed, but efficiency. She took shorter strides, knees low, momentum forward. And without meaning to, she passed one of the senior trainees, Corporal Ridge. He looked up as her shadow moved past him, didn't say anything at first. Then after a few seconds, "Policy girls got legs." Behind him, Sergeant Catton, cadre, arm inked with deployment bands, pride carved into his jaw, narrowed his eyes. Or she's just trying to make a report look good. The third man in their triangle, Foster, gave a low chuckle. Bet they sent her from Fleet Command to review our attrition numbers. "She's got no trident," Catton said. "Probably never deployed, just another observer. They shuffle them in from Annapolis to make a checklist. They watched her disappear around the bend. No music, no earbuds, just breath and form. Hell with this, Ridge muttered. I'm not getting outrun by a desk pass. Catton didn't respond. He just adjusted his pace and started following. Not too fast, not aggressive, but watching now, watching closely. By mile 4, the group hit a flatter stretch winding through red dirt terrain. The aid station loomed ahead. A water rack, a medic, a bored instructor logging arrival times. Mara slowed just enough to splash water across her face, grab a single cup, and continue without stopping. Catton clocked that. Who the hell doesn't stop to hydrate? She's acting like she trained for this specific track, Foster said. She's acting like she's untouchable, Ridge added. I say we test that theory. They didn't share a laugh. They didn't nod in unison. They just ran. Eyes set ahead toward the narrow creek bend that came just before mile 5. No cameras down there. No instructors. No witnesses. Just mud, moss-covered stones, and the sound of running water that could muffle anything you didn't want logged. Foster said at first, breathless but steady, "Trip her there." Catton didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. The creek crossing was always colder than runners expected. Snowmelt from the ridge fed it year-round, keeping the water sharp even in summer. A thin wooden plank once bridged the narrowest point, but after one too many sprained ankles, the instructors removed it, claiming it encouraged lazy footing. What remained was a 20-foot stretch of slick stones, uneven current, and just enough algae to make every step a gamble. Mara reached it alone. The mist was gone now, sunlight glinting off the water like shards of glass. She slowed just enough to read the terrain. Depth changes, rock placement, current angle. Her foot hovered for a second. Then she found the first dry-looking stone and stepped. Her balance held, light, stable, controlled. Behind her, laughter echoed. Ridge, Foster, and Sergeant Catton jogged into view, breathing hard, sweat staining their shirts, but carrying an energy that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Ridge raised his voice just enough to carry over the running water. Careful there, new girl, looks slippery. Mara didn't turn. She placed her second step, then her third. The stones were uneven, but her weight distribution was flawless. Heel to ball, soft contact, no slip. Catton moved closer to the bank, positioning himself just off her line. You sure you know what you're doing? She didn't answer. She was halfway across now. The water rushed louder here, drowning out most sound. That's when Foster moved. A flick of the heel, sharp, precise, timed perfectly as Mara's weight shifted forward onto the next stone. Her foot caught, balance broke, and she went down face first into the rocks. The impact was immediate. Her knees hit first, then her palms. Sharp stone edges bit into skin. Water splashed cold across her face, mixing with blood from a fresh cut on her shin. For a second she didn't move, just lay there in the shallow current, water rushing around her elbows, breath knocked out of her chest. Behind her the laughter came again, louder this time. Ridge was bent over, hands on his knees, shaking his head. Corrective training, he called out. Foster grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. That's what happens when you don't watch your step. Catton said nothing, just stood there, arms crossed, watching her with a cold, measured expression, like he was waiting to see what she'd do next. Mara pushed herself up slowly. Water dripped from her hair. Blood ran down her shin in a thin line, mixing with the creek water at her feet. Her palms were scraped raw, but her face was calm. No tears, no cursing, no plea for help. She stood in the middle of that creek, water rushing around her ankles, and looked at them. Not with anger, not with fear, just looked. Ridge straightened up, still smiling. You good? Need a hand? She didn't answer. She turned back toward the stones and finished crossing. One step at a time, careful, controlled, like nothing had happened. They watched her go. No one said anything, not until she disappeared around the next bend. Then Ridge muttered under his breath. She didn't even react. Foster shook his head, probably in shock. Catton's jaw tightened. Or she's smarter than we thought. They jogged off back into their rhythm, leaving the creek behind, but something had shifted, something quiet, something they didn't recognize yet. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Mara Lauren had been tripped before, in Kandahar, in training, in places where falling meant more than scraped knees, and every single time she got back up. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. And this time, she'd remember their faces. Why didn't she report it right away? Mara kept running. Blood dried on her shin in streaks. Her palms stung with every swing of her arm, but her breathing stayed even. 6 strides inhale, 6 strides exhale. She passed checkpoint 5 without slowing. The aid station volunteer looked up, saw the blood, and opened his mouth to speak, but Mara was already gone. By mile 7, the terrain flattened into a long stretch of packed dirt that wound through open scrubland. Most runners loved this section. It was easy, predictable, a place to recover before the final push. But Mara's mind wasn't on recovery, it was on the gear shed. Every training facility had one. A small building near the finish line where runners could grab water, stretch, or wait out cramps before completing the circuit. At Black Ridge, the gear shed sat just past mile 9, tucked behind a row of old storage containers. It wasn't monitored. No cameras, no staff, just a place to breathe before the final mile. Mara had clocked it on the drive-in. She knew exactly where it was, and she knew they'd be waiting there. Ridge, Foster, Catton, men like that always waited. They didn't just trip you and walk away. They needed to see if you'd fold. Needed to confirm that you were exactly what they thought you were: weak, breakable, undeserving. By mile 8, her legs were heavy, not from exhaustion, from restraint. Every stride carried weight she couldn't release yet. Every breath held something back. She passed 2 more runners on the climb toward the shed. Neither of them looked at her. They were too focused on their own pain. But one of them, a younger Marine with a fresh tattoo on his forearm, glanced down at her leg as she passed. He saw the blood, saw the way she moved through it, and something in his expression changed. Not pity, respect. She reached the gear shed at 8:47. The door was half open. Inside, 3 shadows moved. She slowed her pace, rolled her shoulders once, and stepped inside. The shed smelled like canvas and old rubber. Dim light filtered through a single window, illuminating rows of gear crates stacked against the walls. Mara stepped through the doorway and let her eyes adjust. Ridge stood near the back wall, arms crossed, leaning against a crate. Foster sat on a bench to the left, retying his boot, and Catton stood near the door, blocking the exit. They weren't surprised to see her. They were expecting her. Ridge spoke first. "Didn't think you'd finish." Mara said nothing. She moved toward the water rack on the far wall, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Foster looked up from his boot. "You okay?" "That was a pretty nasty fall back there." She filled a cup, took a sip, still didn't answer. Catton stepped forward, closer to the door. "You know, policy girls usually tap out after something like that. They call it injury protocol. No shame in it." Mara set the cup down, turned to face them. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I'm not tapping out." Ridge pushed off the crate, taking a step forward. "You sure about that? Because from where I'm standing, you don't look like you belong here." She didn't move, didn't blink. "I don't need to look like I belong." Catton's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I already do." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was the kind of silence that sits right before something breaks. Foster stood up from the bench, moving to flank her on the left. Ridge stepped closer from the right. And Catton remained near the door, cutting off her exit. 3 men. 1 woman, no cameras, no witnesses. This was the moment they'd been building toward since the creek. Ridge spoke again, voice lower now. "You should leave." Mara's expression didn't change. "No." Foster laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound men make when they're trying to convince themselves they're still in control. "You really think you can just walk past us?" She looked at him. Then at Ridge. Then at Catton. And for the first time since stepping off that transport truck, she smiled. Small, cold, final. "I don't think," she said quietly. "I know." That's when Ridge moved. He came in fast, a grab for her shoulder, aggressive, meant to intimidate, not injure, but Mara didn't flinch. She shifted her weight onto her back foot, rotated her shoulder out of his reach, and in the same motion drove her palm upward into his sternum. Not hard enough to break anything, just hard enough to empty his lungs. Ridge staggered back, gasping, eyes wide with shock. Foster moved next. He was bigger, slower. He lunged forward, trying to wrap his arms around her midsection. A wrestler's takedown, but Mara dropped her hips, lowered her center of gravity, and trapped his arm under hers. Then she pivoted, used his own momentum against him. He went down hard, shoulders slamming into the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the shed like a drumbeat. Catton hadn't moved yet. He stood near the door, watching, calculating. His jaw was tight, his fists were clenched, but he wasn't rushing in. He was waiting, waiting to see what she'd do next. Mara straightened up. Her breathing was still controlled, 6 strides inhale, 6 strides exhale. She looked at Catton, didn't say anything, didn't need to. He saw it now, saw what Ridge and Foster had missed, the way she moved, the way she stayed calm, the way she controlled distance and timing like it was second nature. This wasn't luck, this wasn't adrenaline, this was training, real training, the kind you don't get from a desk. Ridge tried to stand. His breath was still ragged, but pride pushed him upright. He came at her again, this time with a wild swing. No technique, just anger. Mara didn't block it, she redirected it. A soft parry with the back of her knuckle against the inside of his wrist, flipping the momentum wide. In the same motion, she stepped in, trapped his arm under hers and knelt slightly, applying just enough downward pressure with her knee to pin him against the floor. He tried to push up. She applied more pressure. Not cruel, not excessive, just enough. He stopped moving. Foster was back on his feet now, clutching his shoulder, breathing hard. He looked at Catton. Catton looked at Mara. And for the first time, doubt crept into his expression. "Who the hell are you?" Catton asked. Mara released Ridge, stood up, brushed dust off her knee. Her voice was calm, final, "Someone you should have asked about before you tripped me." Catton's face went pale. The realization hit him like cold water. No trident, no rank patches, no insignia, but the way she moved. The way she stayed calm under pressure. The way she dismantled 2 men without breaking a sweat. He knew. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew. Footsteps echoed outside the shed. Voices, multiple people. The second wave of runners was arriving early. They stopped in the doorway, frozen, eyes wide. One trainee muttered, "Is that Ridge?" Another whispered, "What the hell happened?" Mara didn't move, didn't explain. She looked over her shoulder once calmly, then stepped off the mat. Foster was curled by the wall. Ridge lay pinned, wheezing. Catton sat slumped near the crates, silent. Mara adjusted the hem of her sleeve and walked toward the doorway. The runner nearest the threshold stepped back instinctively, as if clearing space for someone he now understood far too late. She walked past without a word. Emergency protocol dictates that any injury to cadre or candidate must be logged. The junior officer stood in the doorway of the gear shed, arms folded, 3 medics behind him, 6 runners frozen mid-step outside. Inside, Ridge was still pinned against the crate, breathing through gritted teeth. Foster clutched his wrist, face pale. Catton sat slumped, shirt soaked through, eyes dull with something between rage and embarrassment. And Mara stood a few feet away, calm as ever. Brushing a speck of dust off her sleeve, the officer stepped forward. "What happened here?" No one answered. "I asked a question." Mara turned toward him. "They're not severely injured." That wasn't the question. Catton finally spoke, voice low. "We slipped, got tangled up." The officer's eyes narrowed. "All 3 of you?" Ridge forced a cough. "Water station was slippery. I went down. She tried to help. It got messy." "Funny," the officer said. "I just reviewed this checkpoint. No water spillage, dry mats. And she doesn't look tangled." One of the medics stepped around to check Mara's knee. "She's been bleeding for a while. That wound isn't fresh." Mara pulled her leg back slightly. "I didn't request attention." The medic raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you should have." Another officer, an administrative tech from command, arrived seconds later holding a clipboard. "Sir, you'll want to see this." He handed the form to the junior officer, who scanned it quickly. "Injury form for a creek incident," he read aloud. "Documented 5 miles ago. No camera coverage, no instructor confirmation." His eyes shifted to Mara. "You didn't report being tripped." "I didn't." "Why not?" "Because I knew this would be enough." The silence hit hard. The command rep looked up again, tone shifting slightly. "Why didn't you identify yourself before rotation began?" Mara's answer was quiet but firm. "You didn't ask." He hesitated. "Your clearance ID doesn't list a unit." "I was attached to Joint Response Command for Field Behavior Analysis." She paused. "My last permanent billet was with Naval Special Warfare Group 2. That landed like a stone dropped in still water." Catton looked up sharply. "Group 2? No one confirmed. No one denied, but the medic stepped back. The command rep cleared his throat. "You do realize there are protocols for engagement, even for cadre?" "Yes," Mara said, nodding toward the 3 men slumped near the crates. "And I followed them." After a moment, the officer turned to the admin tech. "List all 3 under provisional misconduct. Suspend instructor privileges immediately pending review. Separate Ridge from advanced track." He turned to Mara. "You'll be debriefed at HQ, but for now you're dismissed." She didn't thank him, didn't nod. She simply stepped past the doorway back into the sunlight, boots brushing gravel, blood still dried on her shin, and without hesitation she started running again, toward mile 9. Toward the finish line, alone again, but no longer unseen. The sun had begun to fall behind the ridge when Mara reached the final leg of the run. Shadows stretched long across the gravel path, dust catching gold in the late afternoon light. Most of the candidates had already finished. They were scattered around the open field near the recovery tent, stretching, hydrating, breathing in relief. But every head turned when Mara reappeared on the final approach. Her gait was steady, controlled, no wobble, no limp. The dried blood on her knees stood out sharply against her pale PT shorts. Her shirt clung to her frame, soaked through at the collar and spine, her expression unchanged. No grimace, no pride, just precision. She didn't sprint the last 100 meters. She didn't need to. The only sound was the soft crunch of her boots on packed gravel and the irregular breaths of trainees who were suddenly unsure if they should keep talking. At the edge of the track, a young recruit stood frozen with a bottle of electrolyte solution half raised in his hand. He hadn't said anything during the earlier chaos. He hadn't been near the gear shed, but he'd heard the names. He'd seen the shift in command tone, and now as Mara passed, he found himself standing straighter. She passed him without acknowledgement, but just before the track curved, she slowed, turned, and locked eyes with him. "Ma'am," he blurted, too loud, too fast. We didn't know who you were." She tilted her head. "That's not the point." He blinked. "Then what is?" She stepped closer, just enough that the crowd behind him could still hear her voice but couldn't mistake its calm. "The point," she said, "is that now you do." He swallowed once and saluted, not the sharp theatrical kind, the real kind, the kind that says, "I saw what happened. I understand now. You don't have to prove anything else." Mara returned the salute with a short nod. From the recovery tent, a few more stood up slowly. One instructor straightened. A medic, clipboard in hand, paused mid-checkmark and watched her finish the lap. She didn't acknowledge any of them, didn't soak in the moment, just crossed the final line, paused for breath, and let the sun slide low across her shoulders. The same officer who had dismissed her earlier now watched from the field's edge. He didn't approach, didn't wave, but his expression had changed. Not admiration, not fear, recognition. Mara adjusted her sleeve, turned from the track, and walked alone toward the distant benches near the outer gate, her shadow long behind her but her steps light, no title announced, no medal pinned, but no one not anymore mistook her for the new girl, because sometimes dignity doesn't need to explain itself. Sometimes strength doesn't need to announce its presence. Sometimes respect isn't demanded, it's earned in silence, in the way you stand back up after being knocked down. In the way you finish what you started, even when no one's watching, even when everyone doubted you, even when the odds were stacked against you from the moment you stepped off that transport truck. Mara Lauren didn't need a trident on her chest to prove who she was. She didn't need rank patches or deployment bands or a file full of commendations. She just needed to show up, to run clean, to finish the circuit. And to remind 3 men that underestimating someone based on how they look, where they came from, or what they're wearing is the fastest way to learn a lesson you'll never forget. Not through violence, not through cruelty, but through discipline, through control, through the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. Because dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and when it does, everyone listens.